The cold had teeth. Kayla felt them sink into her bones one by one, a slow, methodical claiming that worked from her extremities inward, as though the winter itself were deliberate in its cruelty. She had been walking for 6 hours. She knew because she had counted her breaths in sets of 30, a trick her father had taught her on long hunts. Give the mind something small to hold, little one, so the body can do its work without complaint. And the counting had eventually stopped mattering and then stopped altogether. She fell face first into a snowdrift and did not get up. The blizzard had followed her from the moment the guards turned their backs. It seemed almost personal, the way the wind found the gaps in her inadequate cloak, the way the snow accumulated not just around her but on her, as though the wilderness were enthusiastically assisting in her burial. Frost crept across her lips like a lover's final kiss, gentle, insistent, final. Kayla pressed her cheek against the snow and thought, distantly, that she was not afraid. That was the strange thing. She had expected fear, had braced for it in the cell beneath the pack compound, had waited for it during the long march to the border. But lying here with her heart laboring in slow, funeral rhythms and her vision narrowing to a gray pinhole, she felt only a profound, aching clarity. I didn't want this. The thought arrived with startling intensity. I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to matter to someone. Just once. Just anyone. But wanting had never been enough. Not in 22 years. Not once. The darkness came for her with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time. Then she felt it. Warmth. Pressure around her torso, firm and encompassing, lifting her from the ice. Her mind tried to form the concept jaws and recoiled from it, then accepted it with the dull pragmatism of someone who has already made peace with death. Something has me. Through the crystallized ruin of her eyelashes, Kayla forced her eyes open. A wolf looked back at her. No, looked was too small a word. He regarded her, this creature that was twice the size of any wolf she had ever seen, his dark fur matted with old scars that told stories she could not yet read. One eye was clouded white and sightless. The other was gold, not amber, not yellow, but true gold, the color of late afternoon light through autumn leaves, and it held her gaze with an intelligence that had no business existing in the face of a beast. "Are you going to eat me?" she whispered. The wolf did not answer. Later, she would understand why. But in that gold eye, she saw no hunger, no cruelty, no predatory calculation. She saw something that looked impossibly, heartbreakingly like recognition, as though he had been searching the frozen wilderness for something and had finally, against all odds, found it. He began to walk. He carried her as though she were made of something precious. 3 days before the blizzard, the pack hall had smelled of wet fur and judgment. It always did. Kayla had noticed this long ago, the way the assembled pack carried the scent of their shifted forms even in human skin. A musk that clung to clothing and hair and filled rooms with the territorial certainty of wolves who had never once questioned their right to occupy any space they entered. She had grown up breathing that smell and finding it both comforting and suffocating in equal measure. She knelt on the cold stone floor at the center of the hall and tried to remember her father's voice. "You're stronger than you know, little one." He had said it the morning he left for the final hunt. Said it with his hand cupping her jaw, his eyes warm and certain, as though he could see something in her that had not yet revealed itself. She had been 12. She had believed him for years afterward, clutching the promise of it through every failed shift trial, every whispered cruelty in the training yard, every meal eaten alone because the other pack children had gotten their wolves and no longer wanted to be seen associating with the one who hadn't. She was 22 now. She did not believe him anymore. Kayla of No House. Alpha Torin's voice filled the hall the way thunder fills a valley, all-encompassing, leaving no space for anything else. Kayla heard the murmur that ran through the assembled pack at that designation. Of No House. She had not heard herself called that before. It was the phrase used for wolves whose family lines had been formally severed, whose bloodlines had been erased from pack records. Her mother still lived and breathed in the back of this hall. Somewhere behind Kayla, her mother was hearing her daughter unmade. Kayla kept her chin level and her hands still in her lap. "You have failed your 3rd shift trial, Torin continued, pacing the raised platform with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never been uncertain of their own power. He was massive in human form, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with a specific quality of stillness that dominant alphas cultivated, that studied, dangerous calm that said I could move at any moment and you would not survive it. 22 years you have walked among us, eaten our food, trained on our grounds, breathed the air of our territory. And in 22 years, not once has your wolf stirred. Kayla closed her eyes and, for the first time in 22 years, felt chosen. The silence stretched. Because I don't have one. The thought came without bitterness anymore, just exhaustion. I never had one. There is nothing in me to stir. You cannot hunt, Torin said. You cannot fight. You cannot sense the pack mind, cannot run the perimeter, cannot contribute to the patrol rotations. You are, in every way that matters to this pack, human. And that makes you a liability we can no longer sustain. The word human landed like an insult. Kayla had always known it was one here. Human blood ran in wolf veins all up and down the ancestry. Everyone knew it, no one acknowledged it. The humans who were occasionally born into wolf families were supposed to have been left behind generations ago, bred out, evolved past. When one appeared, it was treated as an embarrassing recurrence, a genetic ghost story, proof of some ancestral weakness in the bloodline. She had spent her entire childhood being that proof. The sentence is exile. Kayla had known it was coming. She had known it since the second trial, really, and had spent the months between convincing herself she was wrong. She was not wrong. The word still hit her like a fist to the sternum, exile, 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 echoing off the carved stone walls and the carved stone faces of the council elders. You will be escorted to the territory border at dawn, Torin said, and his voice had taken on the formal cadence of pack law being pronounced, the ceremonial distance of someone reading a sentence they have no personal investment in. You will take nothing beyond the clothes on your back and one cloak for warmth. From that moment forward, you are no longer pack. You are no longer kin. He paused, and in that pause Kayla heard something almost like satisfaction. You are nothing. The word rang out into silence. Nothing. Kayla breathed through it. She searched the assembled pack with her eyes, looking for the face she always looked for when things were worst, the face she had spent her entire life hoping would finally choose her, just once, just decisively. She found her mother in the back of the hall, half hidden behind the bulk of a larger wolf, her expression a painting of misery. Their eyes met. Her mother looked away. That was when Kayla understood, fully and finally and without possibility of self-deception, that this was not exile. This was erasure. They were not sending her away. They were pretending she had never been. She did not cry. She had learned, young and painfully, that tears only made the pack see her as more pathetic, more worthy of contempt. She saved them for later, alone in the holding cell, in the dark. She had become very skilled, over the years, at saving things for later. The guards who escorted her to the border were a study in contrasts. The older one was Ren, a female wolf whose face carried the map of a life lived hard and without apology, scars along her jaw from an old territorial dispute, a permanent squint from years of running dawn patrols. She said nothing, offered nothing, walked with the businesslike efficiency of someone completing a task they neither liked nor questioned. The younger one was perhaps 20, a year or two older than Kayla, and he was the one who kept glancing at her with an expression that wobbled between relief and guilt. He had probably drawn the short straw for this duty. She could tell by the way he carried himself that he had never watched an exile before. He will, Kayla thought distantly. They get easier to watch. The walk took 2 hours through the thickening storm. The blizzard that had been threatening since midnight had arrived with conviction, turning the forest into a white curtain through which they moved by instinct and pack sense rather than sight. Kayla could feel neither her feet nor her fingers by the time the ancient boundary stone materialized out of the whiteness, a worn granite pillar carved with warnings in the old tongue. Its surface pitted by decades of harsh weather, but its message still clear to anyone who could read the angular script. Beyond this point, you are on your own. This is as far as we go, the young guard said. His voice had the over-controlled steadiness of someone trying not to sound apologetic. The forbidden expanse begins here. Kayla looked out into the white nothing that stretched beyond the stone. The expanse, she repeated. And what's in it besides the cold? Ren spat into the snow. Rogues. Scavengers. Whatever manages to survive in territory no sane wolf would claim. She paused. And the beast. Kayla turned slightly. The beast. Rogue wolf. Massive. We've had scouts catch glimpses over the years, never close enough for a clean shot. They say he killed his own pack a decade ago. Went feral. Ren's voice carried the flat certainty of someone reciting a story they've been told so many times it has become truth by repetition. He doesn't kill quick. If you see him, don't run. Running triggers the chase response. What does he suggest I do instead? Kayla asked, with a lightness she did not feel. Ren looked at her for the first time. Something in the older woman's expression shifted slightly, not softness, exactly, but a brief, uncomfortable recognition. Don't go north, she said finally. Best I can offer. The guards turned back. The storm swallowed them in seconds. Kayla stood at the boundary marker and did not move for a long time. Behind her lay everything she had ever known. Every cruelty, every disappointment, every morning she had woken hoping this would be the day something shifted in her wolf, in her pack's regard, in her mother's courage. The familiar had done nothing for her except survive. It had done nothing. Ahead lay the unknown and the certain promise of death. She took one step forward. Then another. The cold closed around her like an argument she had already lost. She found the hollow tree as the hidden sun was setting. It was not shelter exactly. It was the absence of exposure, which was as close to shelter as the expanse was offering. The base of an enormous oak, hollowed out by decades of rot, provided perhaps 3 feet of protection from the screaming wind. Not enough, not nearly enough, but her legs had been giving out for the past hour, and the choice was this hollow or the open ground. Kayla crawled inside on hands and knees and attempted, for 10 humiliating minutes, to start a fire. Her fingers would not cooperate. They had passed through pain sometime in the last hour and arrived at a numb uselessness that was arguably worse. She could not feel them enough to know if she was gripping the kindling or releasing it. She fumbled and dropped and fumbled again while the cold worked its way deeper, finding the places where she was still warm and extinguishing them one by one. Old wolves, she remembered her father saying, when their time comes, will walk into the winter woods alone. They know. They know when their purpose is complete. There is honor in choosing your own end. She had been 12 when he told her that. She had thought it was beautiful. She was 22 now, and she thought, this is not honor. This is what happens when the people who should have protected you didn't. But underneath the bitterness was something more urgent, more raw, something that clenched in her chest with the force of a fist. I don't want to die. The realization arrived with startling violence, as though she had expected not to feel it. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to become nothing. I wanted to matter, not to the pack, not to Torin, not to any of them, just to someone, somewhere, once. I didn't get that. I didn't get any of it. And now I'm going to die in a hollow tree and no one will even know where. The cold took her somewhere around midnight. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the disorienting certainty that she was still breathing. Kayla lay in the hollow for a long, confused moment, taking inventory. Her heart was beating. Slowly, sluggishly, but beating. She could not feel her hands. She could barely form a thought that wasn't immediate and primitive, alive, cold, still alive. Why still alive? But she was. Against every reasonable expectation, she was. Maybe the cold isn't merciful enough after all, some dark part of her thought. The rest of her told that part to be quiet. She dragged herself from the hollow on arms that barely functioned. The storm had not broken, snow still fell in thick curtains. The wind still screamed through the tree canopy overhead, but she had survived the night, which meant she had the obligation to keep surviving. Her father had not raised a quitter. Her pack had not broken her spirit, no matter how they had tried. She walked. One step. Another. The familiar voice in her head that had narrated her failures for 22 years tried to speak. Useless, defective, nothing, all the words that had been planted in her by people who'd had 22 years to work them in deep. But her body was too cold for the voice to hold her attention. Her body was focused on the fundamental arithmetic of survival. Feet forward, air in, air out, keep moving. She made it perhaps 100 yards before her legs betrayed her for the final time. The world tilted. She put her hands out reflexively and felt them vanish into snow. This is it, she thought, without particular drama. This is where it ends. She let herself sink. Then came the warmth. It was so impossible, so entirely inconsistent with anything that should be happening, that Kayla's first thought was that she was hallucinating. Hypothermia did that. She had learned it in pack medical training, the cruel joke that the dying played on the dying, the false warmth that arrived right before the end and made you believe, briefly and beautifully, that you were somewhere safe. She was ready to accept it as a mercy. Then came the pressure. Something closed around her torso. Firm. Deliberate. Unquestionably real. Jaws, her mind supplied. Something has me in its jaws. Survival instinct ignited like a struck match, and Kayla forced her ice-crusted eyes open. The wolf looked back at her. He was enormous. Twice the size of the largest wolf in her old pack, perhaps more, a creature whose head was level with her shoulder even now, as he crouched to lift her, whose dark fur was not simply scarred but mapped in old wounds, each one a story she could not yet read. One eye was filmed with white, permanently blind. The other was gold. That gold I held her with complete, unwavering attention. "Are you going to eat me?" The words came out before she could stop them, barely audible, more breath than sound. The wolf did not respond. Could not, she would learn later. But that golden eye stayed on her, patient and intent, and she saw nothing in it that looked like hunger. She saw something stranger. She saw care. He began to move, carrying her through the storm with a gentleness that had no business existing in a creature this size. Each step was deliberate. Each movement was calibrated to avoid jarring her, to keep her level, to hold her body close enough to his that his heat seeped through his jaws and into her frozen flesh. This makes no sense, Kayla thought, as her eyes drifted closed. Rogues don't rescue exiles. Feral wolves don't carry dying girls through blizzards. But her body had stopped caring about what made sense. Her body knew only warmth and motion and the terrible, treacherous feeling that was spreading through her chest, not heat, exactly, but the echo of it. The memory of what it felt like to be held, to be carried, to be chosen. Shouldn't feel this right, was her last coherent thought. Being in a monster's jaws shouldn't feel like coming home. But it did. God help her, it did. She woke to firelight. Not the gray, reluctant light of dawn in the blizzard, but proper firelight, warm and orange and dancing, the light of a fire that someone had built and tended. Kayla lay still for a moment before opening her eyes fully, cataloging sensation. Her body was no longer cold, or at least no longer deathly cold. She could feel her fingers, which was remarkable. Beneath her was something thick and soft furs, she realized, wolf pelts layered 2 and 3 deep, tucked around her with what could only have been intention. She opened her eyes. The cave was larger than she had expected. The ceiling arched 15 feet above her at its peak, the walls of natural stone smoothed by time and made homely by habitation. Bunches of dried herbs hung from iron hooks driven into cracks in the rock. A shelf had been carved directly into the wall, holding an arrangement of bones and smooth stones that looked almost decorative, almost like the accumulated small treasures of someone who had nothing else to collect. A stack of split firewood stood against the far wall, neat and squared. Someone lived here. Had lived here for a long time. Her threadbare cloak was gone. In its place, draped over her shoulders and tucked around her body, was a single massive wolf pelt, dark gray, almost black, with a texture so dense and warm that she felt her eyes threaten to close again just from the comfort of it. She turned her head and found him. The beast sat across the fire in a loose, watchful crouch, his massive frame reduced slightly by the posture, his one golden eye fixed on her with an attention that she could only describe as patient. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time. The scars were worse than she had initially registered, claw marks that raked across his muzzle, old bite wounds along his shoulders, and most striking of all, wrapping his throat in a thick, twisted ridge of old scar tissue, a wound so severe that it should have killed him. That wound had not been from a fight with prey. That wound had been deliberate. They looked at each other across the fire for a long moment. "You saved me," Kayla said. Her voice came out roughened by cold, barely recognizable. The beast's ear flicked. An acknowledgement. "Why?" she asked. No response. Just that steady, golden regard. "What are you?" she wanted to ask. But she thought she already knew part of the answer. The fire. The furs. The deliberate care with which he had arranged the space. The gentleness with which he had carried her. Whatever else he was not mindless. He was not feral. He was, she thought, watching something in her that she hadn't known was visible. He brought a rabbit the next morning, dropping it at the edge of her furs with a careful precision that spoke of long practice, then retreating to his side of the fire to wait. Kayla stared at the rabbit. Then at him. Then back at the rabbit. "For me?" she asked. His tail thumped once against the stone floor. "Yes. I don't have a way to cook it." He picked it up again, carried it to the fire, and positioned it on a flat stone with an attention to angle and heat distribution that should not have been possible for a creature working with paws. Then he settled back down and waited with the patience of something that had learned patience the hard way, through long practice in the absence of alternatives. Kayla watched him with a feeling she couldn't immediately name. It was not comfortable. Exactly, the warmth in her chest came with a rawness underneath it, something that ached at the edges, something that had been dormant for so long that being touched felt like pressing a bruise. When did someone last do something for me, she thought, without expecting anything in return? She could not remember. When the meat was cooked well enough, she ate mechanically, efficiently. The pack had trained that into her too. Don't savor, don't linger, fuel is fuel, and she ate halfway through the rabbit before she noticed he hadn't moved. "You're not eating," she said. He remained still. Understanding arrived slowly, then all at once. "You're waiting for me to finish first." The truth of it was in his stillness. Not submissive, not hungry and suppressing it, simply waiting, in the way of something that has decided the rules by which it will behave and adheres to them without requiring acknowledgement. Something cracked in Kayla's chest. She set the rabbit down. "You don't have to do that," she said, and was horrified to hear her own voice breaking. "You don't have to take care of me. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You should just." The beast moved. He was around the fire in a single fluid motion that made her flinch, but he did not touch her. He picked up the rabbit she had set aside and placed it deliberately, carefully, back in her lap. Then he stared at her until she picked it up. Until she took another bite. Only then did he return to his spot. Kayla finished the rabbit through tears she couldn't explain, while the creature the guards had called a monster watched over her with more tenderness than she had been shown in all her 22 years. "What are you?" she thought again. But the question was changing shape, becoming something more specific. "Who are you?" The days settled into a rhythm. Dawn, he disappeared to hunt. Returns, he brought food. He waited for her to eat first. He added wood to the fire. He slept on his side of the cave and did not crowd her, did not impose, took up space in the way of something confident enough in its own presence not to need to assert it. On the third day, Kayla tried to leave. The storm had broken. The sun lay pale and thin over a world newly blanketed in white, and guilt had been gnawing at her since she woke. The familiar, bone-deep conviction that she was a burden, had always been a burden, would never be anything but a burden. She would not inflict herself on this wolf. She had already imposed on him enough. She made it 50 yards before her legs gave out. She sat in the snow, furious and humiliated and shaking with the effort of those 50 yards, and waited to feel strong enough to try again. She was still sitting there when she felt familiar jaws close gently around her torso. He carried her back without reproach, without anger, without the exasperated sigh or the sharp word or the "I knew this would happen" that would have accompanied the act from anyone in her old pack. He simply returned her to the furs, added wood to the fire, and went back out to hunt as though nothing unusual had occurred. Kayla stared at the cave entrance long after he was gone and felt something hot and dangerous lodging in her throat. "Why?" she thought. "Why keep taking care of me? Why waste the effort on someone who was left to die by the people who knew her best? That night, with him sleeping across the fire, or pretending to sleep, she was never sure. Kayla started talking. She hadn't planned it. The silence of the cave had a particular quality, a held-breath expectation that she found herself filling without intending to. Once she started, she found she could not stop. She told him about growing up packless in spirit though not in fact. About the shift trials, the first one at 13, the second at 18, the third last week, each one a ceremony of hope followed by ceremony of failure. About the children who had been her friends until their wolves came and hers didn't. About the pack training yard where she had learned to defend herself with human hands and human instinct against wolves who didn't need to try hard to make the point. About her mother's eyes, how the disappointment had lived in them since before Kayla could remember, how she had spent years trying to earn her way out of it before understanding that some disappointments are not erasable. About her father. He used to tell me I was stronger than I knew, she said, staring into the dying fire. He said it like he meant it. Like he'd seen something. And then he died on a hunt when I was 12, and I kept believing him for a while after, but... She paused. But being believed in by someone who isn't there anymore isn't the same as being believed in. And eventually you run out of borrowed certainty. The beast's eye opened. Fixed on her with an intensity that stilled her breath. What? She asked. You disagree? He held her gaze. You don't even know me, she said. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure that was true anymore. He had watched her for days with that patient, unwavering attention. He had seen her eat and sleep and cry and try to leave. He had seen her in the full unglamorous reality of survival, with no performance and no pretense. Maybe that was more than most people got. Why did you save me? She asked, and heard the rawness in her own voice, the question she had been circling for days finally arriving at its center. Why do you keep taking care of me? Why would anyone? He moved before she finished the question. Slowly, with the particular deliberateness of something that knows its own size and knows how to make large gestures feel small, he crossed the cave and stopped directly in front of her. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough to see every scar in detail, to count the stories written in his fur. He lowered his massive head and pressed it against her shoulder. Not a threat. Not a dominance display. Not even a nuzzle in the conventional sense. Something more specific than that, more human in its intention. A weight placed gently. A warmth offered. The gesture of a creature saying, I see you, I am here, you are not alone. Kayla's hands moved before she could think about it. Her fingers found the thick fur at his neck and buried themselves in it, and the solid realness of him, the warmth and the weight, and the undeniable physical fact of him, unlocked something she had been holding shut for years. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. He made a sound then. Not a howl, not a whine, something softer and rawer than either, a sound that held the shape of speech without any of its substance, that strained toward articulation and couldn't reach it. Trying to say something. Unable to. She looked at the scar on his throat. Really looked at it this time. Did someone do that to you? She asked quietly. Hurt you so you couldn't. His golden eye met hers. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. I'm sorry, Kayla said, and meant it with every bone in her body. I'm so sorry that happened to you. He pulled back slowly and settled across the fire, but the space between them felt different now. Something had been acknowledged. Some shared understanding had been reached without words, which seemed appropriate, given that words were what had been taken from him. Kayla lay down on the furs, his pelt warm around her shoulders, and fell asleep feeling something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. She felt seen. Kayla woke on the 7th day to the sound of something breaking. Not wood. Not stone. Something organic, something that had no business making that sound. A wet cracking that she associated with injury and fought through the clinging remnants of sleep to locate. She found it. The beast was in the center of the cave, and he was coming apart. Not literally, not dying, she realized in the first terrible second of watching, but changing, his form caught between wolf and something else, something human, bones shifting beneath his skin in ways that nature had not designed to be partial or interrupted. He was trying to shift. He was failing. And she could see in every seized muscle and laboring breath that the failure was not for lack of trying, it was a failure of something more fundamental. Some mechanism that had been damaged so severely that the most natural act available to a wolf had become an act of violence against his own body. He seized. A sound escaped him, not a howl, not the hunting cry she had heard him use at night, but a choking, rasping gasp that bypassed her composure entirely and went straight to the oldest, most instinctive part of her. He's in pain. He needs. She was moving before she'd made a decision to move. Pack law said, do not interfere with a wolf shift. The reasons were practical. A partial shift was a vulnerable state, and an interrupted shift could trigger defensive aggression in even the most controlled wolf. The law existed because it was dangerous, and Kayla had broken more pack laws than she could count, usually by accident, sometimes by impulse, and it had never worked out in her favor. She reached for him anyway. Her hands found fur and shifting flesh, and the moment her palms made contact, something happened. Heat bloomed from her palms like sunlight, like a struck match, spreading up her arms and through her chest in a wave that was not heat exactly, but something older and more fundamental: energy, power, connection. Some exchange that her body knew how to make even if her mind had no framework for it. She felt his struggle as a physical sensation, felt the locked muscles and the warring forms, and she felt her own body responding to it, pouring something of itself into the gaps. His form stabilized. She felt it happen, the wolf completing its transformation with a sudden, smooth certainty, like a door that had been stuck finding its hinges. The beast collapsed, but he was no longer the beast. He was a man. Kayla scrambled back until her shoulders hit the cave wall. She sat there, breathing hard, staring at what she had done. He lay on the cave floor, naked and scarred and breathing in the hard, desperate rhythm of someone who has been fighting a battle for a long time and has just been allowed to stop. He was tall, she could tell, even collapsed, with the build of someone who had been, once, a warrior. His hair was dark and shot through with silver, falling tangled to his shoulders. His face was angular and harsh in the uncompromising way of faces that have seen too much. His nose had been broken multiple times. His jaw was set with a tension that looked habitual. And his throat. The scar she had noticed on his wolf form was worse in this one, so much worse that looking at it required a particular kind of steadiness. It wrapped his neck completely, the raised, twisted tissue of an old, catastrophic wound, the kind that didn't happen in battles between equals, the kind that was inflicted by someone with the strength and intent to make it permanent. His eyes opened. One warm brown, the other still clouded white. They stared at each other across the small space of the cave. What did I do? Kayla heard herself ask. What did I just do? His jaw worked. His hand came up to press against his throat, fingers pressing the scar with a gesture of such habituated frustration that she understood it instantly. He had done this 10,000 times. Pressed his hand there and hoped and been disappointed. His mouth opened. What came out was not language. It held the architecture of language, the breath patterns and the mouth movements and the unmistakable intention to speak, but the sound that emerged was broken, rasping, a grinding approximation of voice that could not quite become voice. The devastation in his expression, in that one good eye, hit her like a physical blow. You can't speak, she said, hearing her own voice come out soft with the weight of it. Even in human form. Even now. His hand dropped from his throat. He looked away from her, his jaw clenching. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to touch you during the shift. I just saw you were in pain and I couldn't. I'm sorry, I should have. His eyes snapped back to hers. The expression in them was fierce and immediate and directed inward, not at her. Not your fault, it said, as clearly as expression could say anything. He tried to speak. Forced the sounds through his ruined throat with visible effort, with the specific determination of someone who has learned not to give up even on things that cost more than they should. Not your fault. The words were mangled, barely decipherable, clearly agonizing to produce. But she heard them. She leaned forward slightly to hear better, and he saw her lean forward, and something in his expression shifted, a small thing, barely visible, but she caught it. the relief of being understood. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He shook his head. The sharp, precise motion of someone with a complete answer they are not going to give. Later, she read in that motion. Or, "I can't." Or simply, "Not yet." With visible effort, he began to shift back. The transformation was smoother this time, because she had touched him. She was beginning to understand, because whatever she had done had given him back some access to the process his body had been locked out of. The knowledge disturbed and intrigued her in equal measure, and she turned it over in her mind while he returned to wolf form and went to the back of the cave. He returned with something in his jaws and dropped it at her feet. A leather journal. Old, worn, the cover creased and stained with time but intact. Someone had taken care of it, she could tell, wrapped it in cloth against the moisture, kept it sheltered. Whatever was inside had been worth protecting. The wolf, the man, pushed it closer with his nose, then retreated to give her space. With trembling hands, Kayla picked it up and opened to the first page. "If you're reading this, then I've lost the ability to hold a pen." The handwriting was rough and uneven, pressed hard into the page with the effort of someone fighting against some physical tremor or limitation. But it was legible. It was deliberate. Someone had chosen these words carefully. "I'm writing what I know now while I still can, in the hope that someday it might matter to someone. My name is Rand. I was born Alpha of the Northern Ridge Pack." Kayla looked up from the page, met the wolf's golden eye. He watched her with an expression of such careful neutrality that she understood it for what it was, bracing. He was bracing for what came after recognition. He had been recognized before and knew what followed. She looked back at the journal and read. Rand had been, by any measure the wolf world recognized, a successful alpha. Strong, fair-minded, respected within the Northern Ridge territories and beyond them. He had led his pack through 3 difficult winters, had negotiated boundaries with 4 neighboring packs without loss of life, had built a reputation for justice that made his pack a sought-after ally. He wrote about this without arrogance, more like the inventory of a person establishing their credibility before testimony that would otherwise be dismissed. The resource crisis had begun when Kayla was 12. 10 years ago, game had grown scarce across the Northern Territories. A confluence of factors, unusually harsh winters, territorial expansion by several large packs that had driven prey animals to new patterns, a disease that had swept through the deer population, had created genuine scarcity across a region that had never faced it before. Packs that had always had enough suddenly didn't. Alphas who had never made hard decisions were confronted with hard decisions. The Alpha Council, a body comprising the most powerful pack leaders in the region, had convened. They had deliberated. And they had decided. They called it practical, Rand wrote. Necessary. The culling of those who could not contribute to pack survival in ways the council recognized, those who could not hunt, fight, or breed. Omegas too weak for winter patrols. Humans born of wolf blood who had never shifted. The elderly whose hunts had slowed. The chronically ill. Children born with defects. They called it mercy. I called it what it was. Murder. Kayla's hands tightened on the journal. When the culling order came to Northern Ridge, I stood against it. Not in argument. I had already argued in council and been outvoted. I stood against it physically. I placed myself between my pack and the wolves who had been designated for death. I was Alpha, and I used that authority to shield everyone the council had marked as expendable. 2 Omegas. 3 humans of wolf blood who had never shifted. My pack's elder healer, who was 70 and could no longer run patrols, but whose knowledge of medicinal plants had saved more lives than any warrior in our history. I protected them. And then I protected them again when other packs tried to complete the culling on Northern Ridge's behalf. I did not go quietly when the council came for me. The account became more fragmented here, the handwriting more uneven, as though the events were too recent or too painful for the clinical precision of earlier passages. The other alphas determined that I was a threat not because I had protected the weak, but because I had named what they were doing. A dissenting voice in a position of power is more dangerous than 1,000 dissenting voices without it. They could not leave me with my influence intact. The punishment was decided in a council session I was not permitted to attend. It was delivered by 12 wolves, which was the number required to hold me down. My vocal cords. They destroyed them with intention and care, the way you would destroy anything you wanted to make sure could never be repaired. And then, because that was not enough, because the word of a mute alpha was still a word, still dangerous, they forced me into partial wolf form, severing my access to the full shift. Human enough to understand my situation. Wolf enough to have no means of expressing it. They exiled me. Marked me as feral. Spread word through every pack in the territories that Rand of Northern Ridge had gone mad with grief after a failed hunt and murdered women and children in his own pack. The Omegas I had protected. The human children I had kept from the culling. I became the murderer of the people I had saved. And the people I had saved, who had heard the rumors from the mouths of alphas they were taught to trust, ran when they saw me. That was the cruelest part. Not the silence. Not even the exile. The cruelest part was standing 50 yards from someone I had bled to protect and watching them run from me in terror, their fear of what they had been told I was overriding everything I had done. The last entry was dated 3 years prior. I don't know if I'm still Rand anymore. I haven't heard my own voice in 7 years. Haven't been human, truly human, in almost as long. The wolf feels more natural now than the man ever did. I forget, sometimes, what I was fighting for. I see Omegas in the distance, traveling between territories, and I have to remind myself, I saved them. I did what was right. But they run when they see me. They all run. I tried. If anyone finds this after I'm gone, if anyone finds this, and I cannot explain I tried, that has to count for something. It has to mean something. The journal ended there. The last entry, 3 years old. The pen had stopped, and the man had become more beast than man, and he had carried this record with him through all of it in the hope that one day, somewhere, someone would read it and know. Kayla set the journal down on her lap. The fire crackled. The wolf across from her watched her with that careful, braced expression, waiting for fear, for revulsion, for the inevitable flinching away that his presence generated in everyone who encountered him. She met his golden eye directly. "You are not a monster," she said, and her voice came out fierce and certain, clearing the roughness from her throat entirely. "You are so far from a monster that I don't have words for it." He was still, except for the faintest flick of one ear. She pressed forward. "You saved people like me. People the packs decided were worthless, defective, not worth the resources to keep. You lost everything, your voice, your form, your home, your name, to protect them." "That's not," her voice cracked. She swallowed. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard. That's the most good thing I've ever heard." He stared at her. "They hurt you because you were right," she continued. "Because having a conscience was a threat to people who had decided not to have one. And she stopped, pressed a hand to her own chest, feeling her heart beating fast. "I understand that better than you know." Something shifted in his expression. A softening so subtle she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching carefully. Something that looked, cautiously, like belief. Then his head snapped toward the cave entrance. Every muscle in his body went rigid. A second later, Kayla heard it, howls in the distance, moving closer. Multiple wolves, running in coordinated patterns. A pack. And beneath the howls, carried on the wind like an unwanted gift, a voice she recognized. "Kayla of No House. We have come for you." Alpha Tauren. Her pack. They had come back. Everything Rand had not been able to say, his body said in the next 3 minutes. He positioned himself between Kayla and the cave entrance with an immediacy that left no room for interpretation. His hackles rose. The low, continuous growl that built in his chest was not aggressive in the way of wolves seeking dominance. It was the sound of something that has identified a threat and is announcing its willingness to die before the threat passes. They will not have her. Kayla placed her hand on his shoulder without thinking and felt it again, that warmth, that flow, the strange gift she had not yet named moving from her into him, steadying something in his wolf that seemed to need steadying. "Kayla." Tauren's voice, amplified by the particular resonance of an alpha in full command of his power. "We have been searching for you. Come home. We were wrong about you. You are not defective, you are blessed. Come home to your pack." Blessed. The word landed strangely. Kayla turned it over, looked for the lie in it. She found Rand's golden eye. He knew. She could see it in the way he looked at her, not simply protective, but urgent, the urgency of something that has specific knowledge and no way to convey it fast enough. His jaw worked. He tried to speak and produced only the rasping effort of a destroyed throat. Then he did something she didn't expect. He shifted. The transformation was agony, she could see it, could feel the echo of it in the way her own power moved toward him instinctively, trying to ease the process. But he pushed through it with the determination of someone who has decided that what comes next is worth the cost. In minutes, the man stood before her again, scarred and shaking with the effort. He grabbed her shoulders, forced her to meet his eyes. "They'll use you," he forced out, each word costing him visibly, fighting its way through ruined tissue. "Drain you. Kill you." "What are you talking about?" "Resonance." He pressed his hand against her chest, over her heart. The word hung between them like a struck bell. "You are resonance." Kayla shook her head. "I don't know what that means." His hands moved to the journal with clumsy human urgency, flipping pages until he found the one he wanted. She leaned over his shoulder and read. In ancient times, before the packs grew numerous and territorial, humans born of wolf blood were revered as resonances. They could not shift themselves, but their presence amplified and stabilized the wolves around them, not as a matter of passive proximity, but through an active, instinctive channeling of power. A resonance touched by a wolf's vulnerability would naturally pour stability into the gap, would steady an unstable shift, would calm a wolf in the grip of battle frenzy. They were considered proof that the bond between human and wolf was sacred. Neither was complete without the other. But as packs grew more insular and power-hungry, resonances became targets rather than treasures. Alphas learned that a resonance could be used, their essence drawn out artificially to boost a wolf's strength, speed, or dominance, bypassing the years of training that such development normally required. The process killed the resonance slowly, burning them out from the inside, like a candle consumed entirely by its own flame. The practice was outlawed by the Grand Council 3 centuries ago. Resonances were to be protected, never exploited. But laws only matter when they are enforced. Resonances are now so rare that most modern wolves believe them to be myth. Those few who are born are either killed as defective children, their inability to shift marking them as failures, or hidden away by families who understand what they are. If you are reading this and you know a resonance, protect them. Guard them from the alphas who would see their gift as a resource to be mined rather than a person to be cherished. If a pack alpha learns what you are, your life is no longer your own. "That's why they came back," Kayla said. Her voice was very steady. The steadiness of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down. "They found these texts. They realized what I was. They exiled me thinking I was worthless, and now they want me back because She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm not worthless anymore. I'm useful." Rand's expression, in that single good eye, confirmed everything. "You knew," she said. "When did you know?" "Not at first," he managed, the words painful and careful. "Smelled different. Felt different. When you touched me during the shift," he gestured between them, a sharp, helpless movement. "Understood then. Should have told you sooner. Didn't know how." Couldn't, she recognized. He had tried. Every time she had asked, "Why did you save me?" Every time she had asked, "What are you?" he had pressed against the limits of what his destroyed voice could produce and come up short. He had given her the journal. That had been his version of telling her. From outside, the howls, closer. Torin's voice again. "We know you're inside. Come out. This doesn't have to be violent." Rand pulled her against his chest, his arms coming around her with the fierce, desperate certainty of a wolf that has decided on something and will not be moved. Against her ear, struggling with each syllable, "Won't let them take you. Won't. Rand." She pulled back just enough to look at his face. "If they find you here, they will kill you. They have authority. They have a bounty on you from the Alpha Council. You are a marked rogue, and they will use that as justification for—" "No." The word was flat and final and rasped. "You can't. Won't leave you." "Rand," she stopped. Swallowed hard. "Why? Why would you risk everything again for?" He cupped her face in both hands. The gesture was so incongruous on a man who looked like he did, those scarred hands, that harsh face, those eyes that had seen too much of the worst things, that the incongruity itself was overwhelming. "Because you see me," he said, each word fighting its way out with terrible effort. "Real me. Not beast. You see," he stopped, his jaw working, pushing through something. "You see the man." Something broke open in Kayla's chest. That wall she had built, year by year, stone by stone, around the part of her that had wanted to be chosen. It cracked and split and fell apart. "You're not a beast," she said fiercely, through tears she was no longer bothering to hold back. "You are the best person I have ever known." He pressed his forehead to hers. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel like a vow. Then he stepped back and began to shift. 20 wolves waited outside the cave entrance. They were arranged in a careful semicircle, not threatening in formation, which was itself a kind of threat, the careful demonstration of force deployed as reassurance. Kayla recognized most of them. Wolves she had trained beside for years, had served in the pack kitchens, had watched from the margins of pack gatherings with the particular longing of someone who has always been adjacent to belonging rather than inside it. None of them met her eyes. Torrens stood at their center in human form, which was itself a statement. Alphas shifted for combat, stayed human for negotiations. The silver of his hair caught the winter light. His expression was warm and carefully crafted. Beside him stood Kayla's mother. She looked smaller than Kayla remembered. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands were pressed together at her sternum in the specific posture of someone trying to contain something they can't speak. She looked at Kayla with the eyes of someone who has rehearsed an apology so many times it has lost all texture. Kayla looked away first. "I'm so glad to see you alive," Torrens said, his voice modulated to carry warmth and relief in equal measure. "We've been searching for days. Come home, Kayla. Come home where you belong." "You left me to die," Kayla said. Her voice was level. "We made a mistake," Torrens said smoothly. The word mistake covered a great deal of ground, and he said it with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. "We didn't understand what you were." But Elder Marin found texts in the pack archives, ancient texts describing resonances, humans born of wolf blood who carry a gift for amplifying and stabilizing those around them. "We were wrong, Kayla. You're not defective. You never were. You're blessed." Beside Kayla, Rand's growl had been building since they'd stepped outside. It was not directed at Torrens, it was something older and more fundamental, the sound of a wolf that knows a predator by instinct, that feels the danger even when the danger is wearing a reasonable face. "Blessed," Kayla repeated. "Come home," Torrens said again. "You'll be honored. Protected. Cherished as you always should have been." Something in that last phrase snagged. Cherished. The word was beautiful. The word was a hook. "You cherish me," she said slowly, "the way you cherish a resource. The way you cherish something valuable." Torrens' expression shifted by a fraction. "I don't understand what you—" "Then let me be clearer." To the right of the semicircle, Elder Marin stepped forward. The Grey Wolf's intelligent eyes moved from Torrens to Kayla, and in them Kayla saw something that surprised her: honesty. Not kindness, not warmth, but the specific quality of someone who has decided that the girl deserves to understand what she's agreeing to. "Yes," Marin said. "You are a resonance. Yes, the pack intends to use your gift to strengthen its alpha. It will weaken you over time. The process is slow, measured. You'll have years of service. Years where you'll finally be useful. Where you'll finally belong." "Years of being drained," Kayla said. "Years of having purpose," Marin replied. "What's the alternative? Living in a cave with a marked rogue, starving in the wilderness? You're human in all the ways that matter to survival. You need pack protection. This is the price of belonging." Beside her, Rand pressed slightly against her leg. Not a push, a presence. "I am here." "I'd rather die free," Kayla said, "than be slowly killed by people telling me they cherish me." Torrens' warmth vanished. "That's the rogue talking," he said, and his voice had acquired edges. "He's manipulated you, Kayla. Can't you see? He saved you so he could use you himself. How do you think he's been able to partially shift? You've been stabilizing him, feeding his wolf with your power. He's been draining you since the first day." Kayla felt Rand go rigid beside her. She turned to look at him. His golden eye met hers. And she saw there anguish, pain, and no denial. Because he couldn't deny it. Not completely. Her presence had helped him. Her power had steadied his shifts. In a technical sense, he had been drawing on her in ways she hadn't known. But, she thought. But he can't even defend himself against the accusation, Torin pressed. He can't speak. He can't explain himself. All he can do is look at you with that one eye and hope you believe in him based on nothing. Kayla looked at Rand for a long, quiet moment. She thought about the rabbit, placed carefully at the edge of her furs. The fire tended through the night. The journal, carried for a decade through an exile he never deserved, waiting for the right reader. The way he had never once asked her for anything. Never demanded her power, never forced the contact, never made her feel like her only value was what she could provide. She thought about the way he had let her try to leave. 3 times. She thought about not your fault, rasped through a ruined throat at a cost she could only imagine, just so she would know. He never forced it, she said quietly. He never demanded it. He never made me feel like a tool. She turned back to Torin. You've done nothing but. Then you've made your choice, Torin said, and his voice had gone cold. Yes, Kayla agreed. I have. She looked at Rand. You need to run, she said. They'll kill you. They have legal authority and 20 wolves and... No. The word was quiet and absolute. Rand. No. He pressed against her, solid and certain and immovable. Against her ear, the agonized effort of words, won't lose you. Won't. Kayla's eyes burned. This man, she thought. This man who was broken by his own pack for the crime of having a conscience, who spent a decade alone in the wilderness, who carried a journal nobody would ever read on the chance that one day it might matter to someone. This man is about to do it all again. She thought about the journal's final entry. I tried. That has to count for something. It has to mean something. She could make it mean something. She could make sure it meant everything. Okay, she said suddenly. I'll go with you. Rand's head whipped toward her. Betrayal. Disbelief. But, she continued, and her voice was steady, you let him go. Unharmed. You give Rand safe passage out of your territory, and I will come willingly. I'll serve the pack as a resonance. I'll give you everything you want. No. Rand's voice cracked on the word. This is the deal, Kayla said to Torin, ignoring the sound. Take it or leave it. Torin considered her for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was not subtle. Done, he said. Rand moved immediately. He pressed against Kayla, and she put her arms around his neck and leaned her forehead against his. Let me do this, she whispered. You saved me. Now let me save you. No, he managed, barely audible. Won't. You gave me a choice every time, she said. Every day in that cave, you could have taken from me and you didn't. You gave me the choice to stay or leave. Let me have this choice. She pressed her lips to his scarred head, feeling the warmth of him, memorizing it. I choose your life over mine. And I need you to let me. His breath shuddered. His arms, in human form he'd shifted back to, tightened around her, and then released. He stepped back. She felt the loss of him like a physical injury. Kayla walked forward, away from the cave, away from the only warmth that had ever been freely given, toward the people who had exiled her and come back for her gift instead of herself. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she would run. And if she ran, he would fight and he would die. They gave her a room in the Alpha's residence. It was beautiful, high ceilings, fur-draped windows, the best linens in the pack compound, a bath with water heated from thermal springs below. She was locked in it. The pack members who brought her meals called her resonance in the tone of a title, which she understood was meant to feel like honor and felt like a collar. They complimented her strength, her gift, her importance to the pack's future. They touched her arm sometimes with a reverence that made her skin crawl, the reverence given to sacred objects, to things whose value lies entirely in what they can provide. Elder Marin visited once to explain the procedures. Monthly ceremonies, each one a bonding ritual in which Kayla would place her hands on Alpha Torin's wolf form and allow the connection to form naturally. The process would feel uncomfortable at first. Her body would need time to adjust. She should not resist. Resistance made the extraction more painful. Extraction. Not even bonding. Maren, in the end, was honest. "You're going to kill me," Kayla said. "You just want to see how long it takes." "You have perhaps 2 years at the current rate," Maren said. "Possibly more if you're strong. Torin is discussing accelerating the schedule. He wants to drain me faster." Maren did not deny it. 3 weeks later, the full moon rose. Kayla was dressed in ceremonial white and escorted to the ritual circle. The pack lined the path and watched her with eyes that held avarice dressed as reverence. She knelt in the carved stone circle and placed her hands on Torin's silver wolf form and felt, immediately and with absolute clarity, the difference between what Rand's presence had asked of her and what this demanded. With Rand, there had been give and take. His need, her response, something freely offered. Like a conversation between two people who respected each other. This was not a conversation. This was a taking. Power ripped from her like water from a wrung cloth, violent and unmeasured, leaving nothing behind but the cold, the same cold she had felt in the blizzard, the same hollowing, except this time it was not the weather doing it. This time it was being done to her by people who called her sacred. She collapsed when Maren finally said enough. She lay on the stone floor while Torin blazed with borrowed vitality, and the pack murmured in awed appreciation, and she thought, this is how it ends. Not quickly. Not with dignity. Just this, slower and slower, until there's nothing left. She thought about Rand. She thought, at least he is alive. She thought, please let that be enough. Her mother visited on the 8th day. She arrived with food and rehearsed remorse, and eyes full of the tears that had come too late to matter. Kayla let her speak. Let her explain the cowardice, the failures, the 22 years of choosing silence. She even understood it, in the objective way you can understand something that has still hurt you past the capacity for forgiveness. "Can you help me escape?" Kayla asked bluntly. Her mother's face crumpled. "I can't. The guards, Torin would kill us both. He's talking about monthly ceremonies now. Maren estimates 6 months before. Before I'm dead," Kayla said. Her mother didn't deny it. Kayla looked at the window. 6 months. An arbitrary deadline, a countdown she hadn't asked for, imposed by people who had done nothing but impose on her. She had spent 22 years accepting impositions. She thought about Rand, pressing his journal into her hands. If you're reading this, then I've lost the ability to hold a pen. He had understood, even in his worst moments, that telling the truth mattered. That the act of naming something, of insisting on its reality, even to an empty cave and a diary, was a form of resistance. That had to count for something. She sat at the window each night after the visitors left and closed her eyes and thought about him. Not as a meditation, not as prayer exactly, but as something between the two, a deliberate act of connection, reaching out across the distance with everything she felt and trusting that the bond between a resonance and the wolf she had chosen could carry it. She felt him sometimes. Brief, distant warmth, like catching the edge of a voice in a wind. He was alive. He was somewhere in the expanse, and he was thinking about her. But feeling was not enough. Feeling did not break locks. For weeks after the first ceremony, the guards outside her door talked too loudly in the small hours of the morning, and she heard things that broke her heart and reformed it in a different shape. They talked about Rand. About the journal Torin scouts had found in the abandoned cave. About the entries that described the culling, the defenses, the punishment. One guard, whose uncle had been Northern Ridge, spoke of what he had witnessed. The truth of Rand's exile. The truth of the lies that had been spread to justify what had been done to him. She stood at her door and listened and felt the specific anguish of someone who had doubted a person who deserved only certainty. "I'm sorry," she thought, pressing her forehead against the wood. "You couldn't defend yourself and I still let the doubt in. You deserved better. You deserved my trust without condition." The second ceremony was worse than the first. Much worse. This time she screamed. The full moon for the second ceremony rose over a pack that did not look at the resonance in the eyes. Kayla had noticed this. In the weeks since the first draining, as her strength had not fully returned and the cold had not fully left her bones, The pack had quietly stopped looking at her. Not from cruelty. Cruelty would have been more honest than this. They looked away because looking meant seeing, and seeing meant knowing, and knowing meant being complicit in a way that required them to decide what kind of wolves they were. Most of them had decided they were the kind of wolves who didn't look. Kayla had walked this path before. She knelt in the ritual circle with her spine straight and her chin level, because if she was going to die here, she would do it with the dignity the pack had never given her in life. Torin waited in wolf form, silver and hungry. The runes on the circle glowed faintly in the moonlight. She placed her hands on his fur. The taking began. It was worse this time because she was already diminished, already running on reserves that hadn't been replenished. The power ripped from her in waves, leaving vacuum where it had been, and in the vacuum the cold rushed to fill, not winter cold, not the blizzard that had nearly killed her in the expanse, but a deeper cold, the cold of being emptied, of being used to the point of nothing. She heard herself scream and registered the sound distantly, the way you register a sound you have no capacity to respond to. "I'm sorry, Rand. I'm sorry I couldn't." A howl split the night. The sound hit Kayla in the chest like a hand slapping her awake. She knew that howl. She knew it the way she knew her own heartbeat, by its particular quality, by the specific pain and fury in it, by the way it bypassed every reasonable response and went straight to something ancient and fundamental. Rand. He was here. The second howl came closer. And then, impact. The compound gates did not so much open as cease to exist as a barrier, and through the gap came a dark shape moving with the terrible, purposeful velocity of something that has decided nothing is going to stop it. 20 pack wolves converged on him. He fought through them. She watched him fight through 20 wolves and she understood, watching it, that he was not fighting like someone trying to survive. He was fighting like someone trying to get somewhere. Every time a wolf brought him down, he rose and continued in the same direction. Every wound he sustained registered and then was ignored. He was bleeding from a dozen places, and he kept coming, carving a path through the compound toward the ritual circle. Toward her. "Stop him," Torin roared, releasing Kayla to deal with this new threat. Kayla collapsed. The stone of the circle was cold against her cheek. She was so empty, so utterly depleted, that the effort of turning her head to watch felt enormous. But she turned it. She watched. They brought him down with sheer numbers, a pile of wolves and silver chains, the only restraint that could hold a wolf of his size, and dragged him to the edge of the ritual circle. They forced him to his belly. His golden eye found her immediately, even across the circle, even through the blood matting his fur. She had never seen that expression on his face before. She would not easily forget it. He is not afraid. He is in agony. "The beast came to rescue his resonance," Torin said, crouching beside Kayla. He grabbed her hair, forcing her to look at Rand. How touching. How noble. How utterly futile. He leaned close. "Here's the choice I'm offering you. You give me everything, all your power, right now, freely, and I let him walk away. Alive. Chained and exiled, but alive. You refuse, and I drain you anyway, and then I kill him while you watch." Rand thrashed against the silver chains. The broken, desperate sound he made was not words, could not be words. His throat was too damaged, but the meaning was absolute. "Don't. Please. Don't do this for me." Kayla looked at him. At the blood and the chains and the one golden eye blazing with terrified love for her. She thought about his journal. "I tried. That has to count for something." It would. She would make it. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll give you everything. Just let him go." Rand made a sound like something tearing. "No. Kayla, no." The words were ragged, barely recognizable, costing him everything he had left. "Don't. You taught me something," she said, looking directly at him, memorizing every line of him. "You taught me that worth isn't measured by what you can do. It's measured by who you choose to protect. By what you're willing to give." Tears ran from his golden eye and his blind one both. "You chose me when I was nothing," she continued, her voice going softer, reaching for him across the space of the circle. "You saw worth where everyone else saw waste. You carried me home in a blizzard and fed me rabbits and gave me your pelt and kept a fire going and never once asked for anything back. You chose me every day. She held his gaze. Now it's my turn. She turned to Torin. Take it. The taking was complete and absolute, and nothing she had experienced before touched it. Everything she was, everything that constituted Kayla, her stubbornness, her rage, her father's voice in her memory, 22 years of surviving what should have broken her, all of it poured out of her into the alpha who had decided he was entitled to it. She felt herself going cold. She watched Rand's eye until she couldn't see it anymore. Thank you, she mouthed. For everything. Darkness. Cold. Nothing. Kayla floated in it and tried to remember what she was. Not who, what. The sense of self was too fragmented for the complexity of identity. She was aware of being aware, which she supposed was something. She was aware of cold and absence and the fact that she had been here before in the blizzard, in the hollow tree, at the edge of hypothermia and been pulled back. No one is pulling you back this time, said the part of her that had always been unkind. But from somewhere impossibly distant, she felt something. A pull. A tether. A warmth that had no business existing in this void, beating against the cold like an ember that refused to go out. Rand. She could feel him the way she had felt him all those weeks in the compound, reaching out through the night. But this was not the careful, tentative signal of someone calling across a distance. This was raw and desperate and whole, his entire self flung at her, as if he had decided to set himself on fire to warm her. Come back. Please. Come back. I can't, she tried to tell him. I don't know how. Choose, she heard, across the bond. Choose to fight. Choose to live. Choose us. Choose. And then she felt it. Underneath the cold. Beneath the emptiness. Beneath the layers of what had been taken. Power. Not gone. Not drained. Hers. She understood it in a sudden, blazing instant of clarity they had taken from her. Pulled from her. Extracted everything within their reach. But reaching had limits. You can take what is offered or what is accessible. You cannot take what is held at the core, what is truly, fundamentally someone's own. Torin had stripped her surface. He had not touched her center. No one could touch her center without her permission. They took from me, she thought, and felt the truth of it ringing through her like a bell. But they could not take everything. Because I have to give it. And I only gave what they could reach. Not what was mine. She reached for her power. Not to give it out. Not to pour it into someone else's need. For the first time in her life, for herself, to take back what had been stolen, to reclaim what had been used, to be full instead of empty. The power answered. Kayla's eyes opened in the ritual circle with the particular violence of someone refusing to stay dead. She was kneeling on stone. She was still in the ceremonial white. But the cold was gone, replaced by something she had never felt, a blazing, incandescent warmth that started at her core and radiated outward, filling every empty space, healing every wound, turning the ice in her veins to light. She reached toward Torin. She pulled. The power he had stolen came back to her in a torrent. And with it, the unexpected, his own strength, his own accumulated dominance, the years of training and natural power that had made him an alpha. It all bent toward her like iron shavings toward a magnet, pulled by a force neither of them had anticipated. Torin screamed. The shockwave came without her intending it. It simply erupted from her body, a wave of pure energy that radiated outward from the ritual circle in all directions. Every wolf in the compound was thrown back. The fire flared. The carved runes in the circle blazed white, and then went dark. Kayla stood. Frost fell from her hair like diamonds. Her eyes, she would learn later, from someone who witnessed it, had gone silver. Power crackled around her in visible waves, making the air shimmer. She looked at the compound she had lived her whole life on the margins of, wanting in. She looked at the faces that had watched her, used her, dismissed her, tried to consume her. She looked at Rand. He was still chained at the circle's edge. Still bleeding. Still watching her with an expression that had broken through everything, the despair, the resignation, the fear, and arrived at something unguarded and whole. He is not afraid of what I am, she thought. He is not frightened by the power or the blazing eyes or the shockwave. He is looking at me like I just gave him the world. She walked to him. The guards around him scattered. She knelt and placed her hands on the silver chains. The chains glowed. The chains shattered. Rand surged to his feet, and even now, even in this moment, his first act was to place himself between Kayla and the rest of the pack. She stood beside him. She faced her former pack. "You tried to use me," she said, and her voice was very quiet. The silence was absolute. "You told yourselves it was necessary, that the pack's survival justified my death. You looked at a person and saw a resource." "You're ours," Torrhen said, dragging himself to his feet, half the alpha he had been. "You're pack property. I am not property." The words were quiet. They landed like a verdict. "I am a person. A person you exiled because I couldn't shift. A person you abandoned to die in the wilderness because I failed to meet your standard of useful." She stepped forward and every wolf stepped back. "A person you came back for only when you discovered I had something you could take." She turned to Rand and placed her hand against his scarred head, her fingers gentle in his fur. "This wolf," she said, "lost his voice, his home, his pack, his name, and his human form defending people you deemed expendable. He spent a decade alone in the wilderness, protecting the same kind of people you sent me to die with. He saved my life with no expectation of anything in return." She looked directly at Torrhen. "He is more pack than any of you will ever be. More human than all of you combined." She looked at the assembled wolves. She looked at her mother, standing in the crowd with tears streaming down her face. "Too late, too late. You had 22 years, she said. "You had every chance to choose me. You chose silence every time." She turned back to the forest, to the expanse that had become her home. "I'm done waiting to be chosen by the wrong people." She turned to Rand. "Let's go home." The den behind the waterfall had become, without any plan or announcement, a village. It had started with the two of them. Then an Omega named Lissa had found them in her third day of flight from a pack that had decided she wasn't worth keeping through another hard winter. Then a pair of human siblings born into a wolf family that had left them at the territory border when their shifts never came. Then an elderly wolf whose pack had discussed his slow hunting in the same tone that the Alpha Council, 10 years ago, had discussed the culling. 7 inhabitants now. Growing. Kayla stood in her garden in the spring morning light and listened to the sounds of people waking up. Lissa's voice, low and warm, explaining something to the children who had adopted her as an honorary aunt. The old wolf, Bryn, telling the same story he had told 5 times before, but differently each time, embellishing, testing the new versions. Somewhere behind her, the waterfall's constant conversation with itself. She felt Rand before she heard him. The bond between a resonance and her chosen wolf was, she had learned, a living thing. Not the extraction she had feared, not the slow consumption the pack had practiced. This was mutual, a warmth that moved both ways, that steadied him without depleting her, that informed both of them of the other's location and state with the quiet certainty of a familiar heartbeat. She felt him approach the way she felt the sun when she turned her face toward it. "Good morning," he said, his voice still rough and scarred and imperfect, still the voice of someone who had fought to get it back and would never take it for granted. She turned to look at him. This man, scarred, silver-haired, angular-faced, one eye golden and one eye white, who had been the monster in her pack's warnings and had turned out to be the only person in her life who had ever simply, consistently, without demand or condition, chosen her. "Good morning," she said. He came to stand beside her and looked out at the clearing where their community was coming to life. "We're becoming a pack," she observed. "A different kind of pack," he said. "Built on choice rather than blood. On acceptance rather than dominance." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you wanted?" "I wanted to matter to someone," she said. "I wanted to be somewhere I wasn't wrong for existing." She looked at him. "This is more than I imagined." He turned to look at her, and in his expression was everything he had ever failed to say, and now could, stacked up years deep. "You deserved this from the beginning," he said. "You deserved this 22 years ago. You deserved it 10 years ago," she replied. They stood with that between them for a moment. Lissa told me something yesterday, Kayla said. She said people in other territories are talking about us. About what I did to Torin. About what we're building here. And? Rand asked. Some of them are afraid. They think I'm a danger. A resonance who learned to take power instead of just giving it. Are they wrong to be afraid? She considered this honestly. I could be dangerous, she acknowledged. If I chose to be. I could drain an alpha into a shell the way they tried to drain me. She paused. I won't. But I could. That's what makes you dangerous, Rand said. Not that you have the power. That you have the discipline to not use it. People fear restraint more than they fear threat. It means you're making a choice. Kayla thought about that. Others who are coming to find us, she said, are coming because they've heard there's a place where wolfless omegas and humans and exiles aren't left to die. And that the woman who runs it, with the scarred wolf who is supposedly a beast and a murderer, has the power to protect it. Rand made a small sound. Is that what they're saying? That you run it? They say the beast follows the resonance's lead. She smiled. I find it appropriate. He put his arm around her shoulders, warm and solid. The weight of him was a thing she had memorized in the cave, in the blizzard, in 22 years of loneliness preparing her for this specific warmth. Are you afraid? He asked. Of the packs coming for us? Of all of it. What we're building. What you are now. The child. His hand moved to rest against her stomach, the same gesture he had made every morning since she had told him, protective and wondering and still slightly disbelieving. She thought about the question carefully. No, she said finally. I've been afraid my whole life. Afraid I wasn't enough, wasn't right, wasn't wolf, wasn't worth the space I occupied. And being afraid didn't protect me from anything. Being afraid didn't stop the exile, or the ceremonies, or any of it. What did? She looked at him. Choosing, she said. Choosing to fight when I had nothing left. Choosing to trust you when every reasonable argument said I shouldn't. Choosing to go back with Torin so you'd live to come get me. She paused. Choosing every day to believe that the world could be more than what I'd been given so far. She pressed her hand over his, over her own stomach, over the life they had made. That's what I want to teach them. Not how to fight, though we'll teach them that too. How to choose. Rand pressed his lips to her temple, the top of her head, her cheek, small gestures, quiet gestures, the gestures of a man who spent 10 years without the ability to make them and has never stopped being grateful for the capacity. What shall we name them? He asked. I have thoughts, she said. Of course you do. Their father was a man who lost his voice for knowing right from wrong, she said. Their mother was a woman who was told her whole life she was nothing. I want a name that means something real. Something earned. Tell me. She turned to face him fully. In the spring light, with the waterfall behind them and the sound of their people coming awake and the smell of new growth and the weight of his hands on her and the bond between them like a hearth fire, like a constant warmth, she told him. He listened. When she finished, his scarred face broke into the smile that still, after all this time, stole her breath. Perfect, he said. Below them, in the clearing, Lissa called them down for breakfast. The children were arguing over the fishing spots on the stream. Old Bryn was beginning a story. Somewhere in the forest, the morning birds had started up in earnest. Kayla took Rand's hand. They walked down together into the life they had built, into the home they had found in each other, into the community of all the wrong people who had turned out to be exactly right. The packs would come eventually. Some with fear, some with hostility, some with desperate hope. Each one would find what no pack law had ever managed to create, a place where worth was not measured in teeth or fur, or the ability to shift under a full moon. A place where a wolfless woman and a voiceless alpha had decided that the ones deemed expendable were, in fact, the most essential. Where the monster was the only one who saw your worth because he had spent a decade learning what the world cost when worth was measured wrong. Where the beast was the man. Where the nothing was everything. Where home was not a place you were born but a thing you built, with scarred hands and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to believe that you deserved less than the warmth you could give to someone who had given the same to you. Always, he had said. Always, she had promised. And in the spring light, with the waterfall singing and their people waking and the future curled small and possible between them, always was exactly what it was.